Professor Carrese, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. We're so happy to have you with us today. And we're going to ask if you'll just start with a few opening comments, and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that warm introduction. I'm delighted to be asked to join Constituting America. Congratulations to all of you for building this organization and being involved in it. And for everybody watching it live or recorded, this is a great thing that you're doing, because the reality of being a free human being and a free citizen or aspiring citizen of the American Constitutional Republic is one of the most extraordinary phenomena in all of human recorded history. But it does not come easy, and it does not happen or get sustained automatically. So to learn about being a citizen, to learn about our complicated, deliberately complicated constitutional order, it takes work, but it's important and it's exciting. So I'll do my best not to put you to sleep in the next 8 or 9 minutes or so. I've been asked to talk about constitutional restraints and why that's a principle in our American constitutional political order. And I'm going to start with a pocket constitution, where you should start with the Declaration and the Constitution. Behind the Constitution stands the Declaration of Independence. That's sort of the why. But the hard work of the how, of sustaining natural rights, equal natural rights for all, requires forms of government. The Declaration of Independence itself calls for peoples constituting forms of government, and if they're just, they are serving the higher aim of protecting these natural rights endowed by our Creator with these inalienable natural rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, among others. So the test of the Constitution is, does it serve the ultimate aims and purposes of the Declaration? So a pocket constitution is a handy little document to have, because it often has the Declaration and the Constitution with all the amendments to the Constitution, 27 amendments. I'm a department head of a new concept of a university department. It's a department really on civics and civic education at a major national university. And I'll talk a little bit later about how this idea is spreading from Arizona State. We were the state of Arizona, to other public universities around the country. But we produce a pocket constitution. We add Lincoln. We have Lincoln on the cover, the Gettysburg Address, to make sense of 77 years ago, 1776. What does America mean? 77 years ago, this is what we were founded to do and to be. And the question is, can we sustain this? Are we on the right track? And then we add as well Martin Luther King Jr., 1963, the I Have a Dream address, standing deliberately on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And in the transcript of it, we have the transcript of it in our little pocket constitution. He praises the architects of our republic. And he praises the magnificent words of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Because America stands for equal liberty for all, equal natural rights for all. That's an idea from Lincoln. And Martin Luther King is saying, I believe in America. I have my arguments with, my complaints about America not living up to these principles, but I believe in America. So constitutional restraints, why? So in the pocket constitution, between the Declaration and the Constitution, you see this idea, first idea, liberty, right? Equal natural rights for all. Summarized in that phrase, liberty. Just government is about protecting liberty for all. That includes, however, forms of government. It's not anarchy, or it's not simply negative about government. In the Declaration of Independence, it refers to forms of government, just forms of government. So the second principle to think about is ordered liberty, right? Order, the rule of law. The Americans came out of an immediate political tradition, the British political tradition, the British constitutional order, the English common law tradition, which tried for centuries to strike this balance between liberty and order, right? And a complicated form of government. You could say, in a way, that goes back to the Greeks, goes back to the Romans and the Roman Republic, through the medieval republican forms of government, the Italian republics. But the Americans come most immediately from that English common law tradition, trying to come up with ordered liberty, a constitution of liberty. So this leads to my third point, that means you need to come up with a constitution, a basic charter of all political activity and forms of government, that empowers government but restrains it simultaneously. You want to empower government. You need government in order to protect equal natural rights for all. But you have to restrain government so that you can be sure government is not serving just the few who happen to be in the governing offices or powerful people. It's actually serving equal natural rights for all. So that's the third principle: empower government and restrain it simultaneously, right? So this is not a piece of cake. This is very hard. And almost 250 years into the American experiment of working on it, we are still working on it, right? We've done better than any other political community ever known to human history in doing this, but it's hard work and you get a lot of things wrong and you keep arguing about how to get it right and how to strike that right balance. So the federal constitution, as we would call it, the 1787 Constitution, obviously was trying to make a stronger government than existed under the Articles of Confederation, our first attempt at a constitution. But in the convention in 1787, these two famous men, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, they say, yes, we're going to join this constitutional convention and support it, but it has to support the idea of equal liberty, equal natural rights for all. So we want a stronger federal government, but not too strong. So I'll finish up with these thoughts. The two crucial principles are separation of powers or distribution of powers and federalism. And federalism is really an extension of the idea of distribution of powers. The American answer to striking this balance, ordered liberty, is always make it more complicated. Can't go wrong. Always make it more complicated. It's going to be great. Trust me, right? That's the American principle. Okay, we're going to have a legislative, Article 1 of the Constitution, legislative power. Article 2, executive power of the president. Article 3, judiciary. Not good enough to have just a legislative power. You have to split the thing in two. And you have to make the two branches, the House, the lower branch, and the Senate, the upper branch, you have to make them elected in different ways. And they represent different peoples, different constituencies, right? So the answer is always more complicated. Executive branch has lots of powers, but it can't do a lot without the Congress buying in, right? You got to have the legislature in both branches supporting, appointing people to government offices or having money for a budget or declaring war, right? Okay. The judiciary, well, it's third. It seems to be not very powerful. Well, it's not literally in the Constitution, but the framers in the convention talked about a power of judicial review, constitutional review. So suddenly this branch that seems kind of weak and third and forgotten, no. Very much a player, right? And turns out the most powerful judiciary known in all of human history, okay? But then, wait a second, there's Article 4, the states, right? What the states can't do, but implicit in Articles 1, 2, and 3 is all the things the federal government cannot do. So the whole principle of enumeration of powers. Article 1 is the longest power, the longest article, because the legislature is thought to be the most predominant power. It lists what the legislative branch can do, the federal Congress can do, but implicit in all that is all the things they can't do, right? And the Federalists and even, the Anti-Federalists, the folks who oppose the ratification of the Constitution, they're not happy with this. And even some of the Federalists have been, oh, okay, right. So a compromise is agreed to, and James Madison is the architect of that compromise. There will be a Bill of Rights to make more explicit what the federal government cannot do. Okay, so I should finish up and let us move on to questions. But this principle of restraints by empowering a government and by literally restraining it, right? That's why our Constitution, it was meant to be short enough to be understood by the citizenry. They talked about this at the Constitutional Convention. We're not going to write a code. It's got to be short enough in a way to carry around, right? And be able to read it and understand it. But it gets across this idea we're going to empower government to protect equal liberty for all, but we're going to restrain it. And sometimes it's restraining it by setting up other parts of government, right? No one part of the government can do things unless other parts of the government basically agree. And then there's also explicitly restraining it. The government may not do this. The government may not do that. Only states can do this. Only states can do that. Okay, so between separation or distribution of powers and federalism, you get the real meaning of this idea of restraint. And again, it's not meant to just stop government from doing things. Government has to be able to function. Government is absolutely necessary, but this is the way to strike the balance so you get ordered liberty. Okay, and then just quickly, I mentioned there are these departments of civic thought popping up at public universities all over the country. You might be in a state that has a new one just popping up. It started 7 years ago in Arizona. I was asked to come from the Air Force Academy down to the Phoenix area, Tempe, to help ASU establish this new department. It's got a long name, School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. But there are now departments or even colleges in Texas at University of Texas, Austin, Tennessee at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Florida at University of Florida, Gainesville, UNC, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the oldest public university in the country. They're establishing a school of civic leadership. Ohio at Ohio State and at 4 other campuses in the Ohio public university system. Utah has a smaller program at Utah Valley University. More of these will be coming to states near you. And all of them, I try to tell all of them as the department head for the first of them, you should care about being an excellent academic department, civic, constitutional, American civic thought as an undergraduate major or minor, have speakers programs which feature diverse points of view and civil disagreement. That's the second thing. And the third thing is support K-12 civic education in your state and beyond, because that's what a public university very fundamentally should do. So I think Jacob is going to put in the chat the link to our department, but you again be reading and thinking about whether one of these is coming to a state or public university near. And the second thing he's going to put in the link is that Educating for American Democracy EAD study, K-12 study that I was involved in. I'd be happy to take questions about that as well. Okay. On to questions.
Thank you. Thank you. That was an excellent overview. And I loved your walk through the Constitution and how you started with the Declaration of Independence, which is how Janine has designed all of our school speeches. And that's the first thing that we always start with is the Declaration as well. And just thank you for the great work that y'all do at Arizona State University. We've had several of your professors on our chats, and it's just y'all are doing much needed work, and it's very exciting to see this spreading to universities across the United States. So Janine, I know you've got some questions, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Hello, Professor Carrese. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I echo what Kathy is saying. It's truly almost just sort of, you can sigh a little bit of a relief. It's sort of like, woo, that you're doing this, that you've taken on this challenge through your university, and it's spreading to other universities. This is really needed in our country, and thank you for being a champion of the cause. And I'm putting together my book right now, which is filled with kind of poetic prose and poems, but I came up with, you were talking about what the Constitution is. I wrote, the Constitution is the conscience, the call, and the construct of civic service.
That's great. That's great.
It's good duty, isn't it? I mean,
wonderful.
It's the conscience, but it's our call to make it better. It's the conscience, it's the root, it's our call to be of service, to make it better. And it's the construct of this civil community, because with the checks and balances, which are going to be my primary questions to you. I also love the way you talked about the complication of it, but I like to think of it. But then again, it's interesting because you hold up that tiny little book, and we all love the Constitution. We have our little pocket constitutions, but they are counterintuitively, simple. So I think that there's a simplicity. There's a simplicity to their complication. You know what I mean? It's complicated, but it's simple. It's not 1,200 pages or 2,500 pages. It's just a few pages. That what they were able to do. I'm a writer, so when you turn in something as an opinion editorial, you have to shrink it down. And if suddenly it was 3,000 words, you have to make it 850 words. And I think that's what they've done. And that's the beauty of the simplicity of what they're asking, but the complication of what they're asking. It's that duality that I think's really made it shine. Great. So those are my first thoughts about that. And also, we'd love to be speakers at the schools with you. We have our speaking initiative, George Washington. Great. We have a team of speakers. Okay. I think we talk a lot here, and I think our society is myopically focused on this me centricity of like my rights, and there's so much focus on that, which is good. But I would like to do what I hear you are saying, and you're focusing on the checks and balances that make it possible. And if we don't understand what the checks and balances are, we're going to lose everything. Because if we don't understand what the construct of our government, it's going to go away. We're going to lose it. We won't know if they're telling the truth in DC or not, these people that we hire and fire with our vote. The greatest example I always talk about here, everybody's heard it 1,000 times, but it's the Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Treaties are no longer being ratified by the Senate because they've changed the name to an executive agreement, and that just drives me crazy. And they're all like, "Oh, we need to form a bill so we can approve these." I'm like, no, it's already there in the Constitution, and even people on the Hill are saying that. Yeah. So, would you talk with us after my rambling little enthusiastic response to what you had to say and appreciation of what you're doing? Would you talk to us about your favorite checks and balances? What do you think are your favorite checks and balances within the construct of the Constitution, the complication that keeps things from getting out of control? Because I believe it's the Constitution has prevented us from falling so far, right? Into Rome or the Venice Republic or Greece, but also we didn't fall to a Napoleon-like figure or Hitler or Stalin or Mao. So far, so good. But it's those checks and balances that have done that, I think.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. I'll start by, and I do want to get back to your very nice phrasing, conscience and call. I will start by saying, full disclosure, my first book was on the idea of an independent judiciary, where that came from, because it's a phenomenon of liberal democracies all over the world that judges and lawyers are so powerful and so prominent, and a lot of good has come from that. Part of the book was also this problem that has arisen in the past century of judicial overreach, of judiciaries being overly powerful beyond the bounds of their own constitutions. But I'm saying that because I want to pick a different as my favorite. My favorite one is federalism, because a part of that complexity, again, is that there are 13 state constitutions involved in the process of ratifying the new 1787 Constitution, as called for in the 1787 Constitution as proposed, right? So there's a recognition in the structure, the construct, as you call it, of the proposed 1787 Constitution, that there is a multiplicity. There exists in America a multiplicity of governments. Federalism is not written as a word in the document, but it's clearly the spirit of the 1787 Constitution. I mentioned the Bill of Rights, which is in a way a demand in several of the state ratification debates to say, okay, well, gentlemen's agreement, we'll agree to ratify this new Constitution coming from the Philadelphia Convention, but only if there's a set of fundamental restraints placed on government, classic English common law rights, et cetera. So federalism, the idea that there are multiple governments. See, I stand here as a citizen of the state of Arizona and of the United States of America, right? In a way, two constitutional republics. I forgot to bring my other prop with me, but one of the things that our department does, we have a US pocket constitution and we have an Arizona pocket constitution. And we were told it's the first pocket constitution in the history of the state of Arizona, which is not that old, 1912. But it had never been done before. No one in state government had thought to do it before. Now, it's a complicated thing. Many of the newer constitutions established, especially from the 1850s onward, are longer because they're easily amended. That there can be referenda and constitutional amendments put on a ballot. So we come up with what we call the essential Arizona pocket constitution to make it, what are the essential, really still governing parts of the Arizona Constitution. But we do that because civic education. That's really smart. Yes, civic education means knowing your state constitution and your state form of government and knowing the federal US Constitution. So that restraint right there, the federal government has always got to be looking over its shoulder. What can it get away with if it wants to do something? And the states and the governors are always pushing, right, to say, you can't do that, right? States attorney general are suing the United States government. Governors are pushing back against, and groups of governors are pushing back against the Congress or the Congress and the president. So.
Yeah, they do say that in the 9th and 10th Amendment. I mean, I'm talking about when you talk about they don't really state federalism. I was thinking of where they might do it. I think they do it in the 9th and 10th Amendment. You know,
Correct. It's just the word with the ism isn't used, but the principle, the spirit is there. And yes, definitely the 9th and 10th Amendment.
And then also that every state has to be a republic, a Republican form of government.
The guarantee clause in Article 4. Correct.
So that's really interesting.
Yes.
And you know, there are these complications that are happening, say, with things like the border, right? It's like where does the state have the right and the federal government have the right? They're all confusions. But we've talked here a lot about federalism means you have states. You know, you are looking over your shoulder at another. Do you think the states are losing their power, though?
I would say after a century of an effort to remove power from the states and relocate it to Washington, D.C., it's fairly extraordinary how powerful the state governments remain. I'm not saying we're in a good situation, but all over the world, most of the new liberal democracies do not have the degree of federalism. They don't have the degree of local government control and explicit or implicit restraints on the central government, the central capital, to the degree that America has. So I do think federalism has lost a lot of ground in the past century, but it's still, we have more federalism, a robust concept of federalism and local government, more robust than any other government on the face of any other liberal democracy on the face of the planet. So that's a testament to, you know, how smart this document was and the principles of it. But I do want to go back in response to that question to your phrasing, conscience and call, because there are, conscience means principles of right or justice, right? Ethics and then sort of broader political ethics, justice. And the conscience of the Declaration of the Constitution does call for local government, self-government, participation in your government. So the part of the conscience is the call to be a citizen as an active participatory thing, right? Citizen is a verb as well as a noun. And federalism relies on that. People in the states have to elect the right kind of people and then get the right kinds of, you know, judges appointed or elected, however it happens in different states, so that the principle of federalism stays alive, state by state by state by state. It takes citizens in each state to say, I'm in effect a dual citizen. I'm a citizen of Arizona. I'm a citizen of Alabama. I'm a citizen of New York. I was born in New York State, and a citizen of the United States. And I'm proud to be a citizen of both. But I'm going to insist that my state government and the United States government does what they're supposed to do according to that third point, the construct, right? The conscience and the construct of it, that we have balanced, ordered liberty, and we have this idea of let local liberty and local self-government be as active as it possibly can be within the construct of the federal Constitution and the amendments of the Bill of Rights. And that's, you know, takes a constant effort. So enough people like you, Janine, Constituting America, many other individuals and organizations have been interested in federalism, in this set of principles, and has kept it alive in the past. Really, the past 75 years have been the most, 70, 80 years have been the most challenging time.
To really understand why it matters. Why does it matter?
Yes.
Okay, I have to toss to other people to ask questions. I could ask you questions all day, but I will ask. I'm gonna challenge you. Are you ready? Are you ready for a challenge?
Is that me or the other questioner?
Yes, you.
Oh, me. I'll take. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Fire away.
Okay, I'm gonna see if you can simply explain, in regard to this federalism discussion that we're having and the power of the states, why the Electoral College matters. So that's like a 1 minute answer.
And so I have 45 minutes to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, no.
Okay,
No,
so
you have more
the
like,
basic,
45 seconds.
So it's again this matter of the background principle, as I mentioned, complication, right? The principle behind complication is balance or moderation, avoid going to extremes. So part of the problem of the 1780s was no executive in the Articles of Confederation form of government. It's just Congress. Congress is one body, not bifurcated. There's no president or executive or anything like that. There's no judiciary. So George Washington is very interested in having the 1787 Constitution called, and he goes there to support it because there's a need for some executive energy. But part of the problem with single executives is that they can be too much like kings, but they can also be too much like demagogues. So if you have a single office like a president or a prime minister, right, You don't want a king, but you also don't want a rabble-rousing, angry, crowd-pleasing troublemaker who's going to actually tear down the Constitution and not serve the conscience and the call that you talked about. So to make sure that there was a powerful executive, but not too powerful, and a capable person who is not just, to use the term, a popular politician, right? They decided to make the presidency not directly elected by the people. It's the same reason that the Senate was not, as originally designed, directly elected by the people. The House is directly elected by the people. You've got 13 states out there, and they hope the number of states would grow. So there's the small d democratic element in the House and in state and local government. But the Senate is not directly elected by the people in the original design, and the president. And then they came up with this complicated mechanism. They wanted federalism to be represented in the way you select the president. So if each state gets to cast votes in the College of Electors, that means it's not just a popular referendum on a couple of candidates. And it's not just a small d democratic popular referendum. The fabric of federalism is in the selection, obviously, of the Senate, but also in the Electoral College. So again, complication, balance, to have all of these principles at once was thought to be better than simpler, and especially, again, democracy, small d, is not a bad word at the founding. It's just a possibly troublesome word. So you want to balance it. We're really a republic more than a democracy. You're going to have democratic elements to the republic. And one of the features that really makes us a republic is, well, both the Senate and a single executive who's not popularly elected.
I'm going to toss now to Tova, but I think that with the Electoral College, when you touched on the fact that the states are represented, that's what's really important with the Electoral College, because if you do away with that, smaller states with less people will not be represented. If you have, yeah. I was always amazed when I drove through Wyoming. There were like 200,000 people in the whole state of Wyoming. And if you just go with popular vote, they will not have a voice. And so I think that's one of the important things about the Electoral College. Okay, I have to toss to Tova now in Italy. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Professor, so much. Restraint in our Constitution. I wanted to ask about a topic that we've discussed kind of a lot about at Constituting America, which is the idea of the tyranny of the majority, and how in a democratic system where you have obviously we're a republic, but with the majority generally being able to have the majority representation, how do you ensure that they essentially don't have relatively unlimited power to impose their will over like the rights of a minority, whether that is racial or political or geographic or things like that, similar to what Janine was saying. So could you talk a bit about how the principle of restraint in the Constitution connects to this idea of protecting from the tyranny of the majority?
Wonderful, Tova. Thank you for that. Well, one of the sources of the understanding that James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and John Adams and many other framers had, Jefferson as well, their understanding of ordered liberty and this attempt at coming up with a constitution for a republic that would strike these balances in the right way. And it would represent the people, right? The principle of the Declaration of Independence is consent to the governed, right? It would represent the people, but the government would not be so powerful that it would endanger rights. And also this principle that a popular majority alone couldn't endanger rights of minorities or of individual people. One of the sources for understanding that was, Kathy mentioned the name earlier in talking about my background, a French philosopher named Montesquieu, who was a judge. He was a lawyer and a judge. Fun historical fact, Montesquieu dies around 1755 or so. So he never sees America come to birth, but he would love the idea of the American federal constitutional republic. He is the philosopher who thinks of this idea of federalism or federal republics, a small set of republics joining together to make a larger republic while remaining each of them as separate republics. Fun fact, Montesquieu's grandson fights with the French in the American Revolutionary War. Montesquieu's grandson knew George Washington. He knew English well enough So he was translating from the French officers to George Washington and the American officers. So Montesquieu is an important source here, and Montesquieu talks about democracy or popular majorities going too far, from Athens to ancient Athens, right, to in more recent times. So Montesquieu is in favor of a republic, so that you don't have, now he doesn't use the phrase tyranny of the majority, but he's got the basic concept there. Then Montesquieu is very important for the Federalist. I mentioned, Publius, the pen name for Alexander Hamilton, who pulls in James Madison, and then the two of them pull in John Jay under the pen name Publius. They are very concerned with this idea, democracy, small d, it's not bad per se, but it has to be carefully balanced and structured in a constitutional form of government so that the popular voice is present, but not overpowering, and won't endanger rights, natural rights of individuals or minority groups. The third source important to mention here, you use the phrase tyranny of the majority. That comes from another French philosopher, very influenced by Montesquieu. Kathy mentioned it earlier, Alexis de Tocqueville. Tocqueville's most well-known book in America is Democracy in America. And he talks about, praises the American framer for having a democratic republic, a constitutional democratic republic, that does empower the people, does represent the voice of the people, of majorities, of popular majorities, while also restraining it and ensuring it's less likely that there will ever be a tyranny of the majority. So the idea of having a separate Senate representing the states, not directly elected, that's a not so popular, not very democratic institution. The Electoral College is not a democratic, small d democratic institution. An independent judiciary, which is selected by the executive, not directly elected by the people, and the Senate, not directly elected by the people, right? Those two bodies select the judges. If the judges get through Senate confirmation, they are appointed for life, practically speaking, right? It's appointment during good behavior. Some federal judges have been impeached and removed from the federal bench, but very few, and no Supreme Court justice has ever been removed. So that's a non-democratic institution, that Supreme Court, right? All of those, and then, lower federal courts, the states have their court systems, right? All of those were ways to prevent what you were talking about, tyranny of the majority.
Well, great. Thank you. That was a really wonderful overview. And just shows the real genius of how they had to balance all of these different, power.
Your tone was cutting out.
Before the chat started, we were. Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, great. So before the chat, we were talking a bit about me being in Italy, and you were mentioning how this idea of constitutional restraint was partly inspired by. So I was wondering, or at least like Roman government. So I was expanded it.
Sure. So I'm going to actually mention another Italian source as well. So yes, I just mentioned that the Federalist paper, the Federalist as it was called, the Federalist paper is written under the pen name Publius, a Roman name. The anti-Federalists, so I also mentioned, right, these are the Americans who love America and love American liberty and love the Declaration of Independence, but they are worried about this new proposed 1787 Constitution. They think it's too strong a government that's being proposed. One of the first writers for the anti-Federalists, they didn't call themselves that, they were later called that, is Brutus, a Roman name. Brutus is one of the people who led the overthrow of the Roman monarchy. I got to get this right. I think it's the 5th century BC, to establish the Roman Republic. And all the leading Americans knew this history. The other partner for Brutus was this man, Publius Valerius Publicola. And so Hamilton, once Brutus is writing out there against the ratification of the Constitution, Hamilton and Madison choose the name Publius. So the Americans in the late 18th century are thinking about the example of Rome. What went right about the Roman Republic and what went wrong? Because famously, the Roman Republic ends up being kind of imperial in its military conquests, not really interested in the liberty of other people, right? And then eventually it descends into empire itself. They lose their own liberty and they have an emperor. So what went right? What went wrong? So the Americans are thinking we are going to be a better constitutional republic than the Roman Republic. Now they took some elements from the Roman Constitution under their republic, the idea of the Senate, having this distinguished body of citizens who were thought to be wiser and more sober and more calm, especially about foreign affairs. So there are elements the Americans take, but they basically are trying to think what went right, what went wrong, how can we do this better. I do want to mention one other Italian, other than knowing about the medieval Italian city-state republics like Florence and Venice. I want to mention one other Italian source of the American Declaration of Independence, an Italian from Naples named Tomas d'Aquino, who's known to us as Thomas Aquinas. It was really one of the founders of the idea of a university, a place where you can study Christian thought and the sacred scriptures and theology, and study Aristotle, science, philosophy, law and politics in this more scientific way. You can do both. And Aquinas was a great teacher of natural law, which is the source for our idea of natural rights of individuals, especially in the American Declaration version of it. Because in the American Declaration version, it talks in a way about duties and obligations as well as rights of individuals. So the last phrase of the Declaration of Independence fits perfectly with Aquinas' concept of natural law, that we are beholden to the rational governing divinity of the universe. The Declaration of Independence has 4 references to a divinity, right? But Aquinas makes that argument. You don't have to believe in the Jewish scriptures or the Christian scriptures. You can, by reason of philosophy, believe in an ordering mind of the universe. That ordering mind says we have both individual rights and we have duties to others, right? Especially in a particular political community, to obey the laws that are just laws. And okay, so the Americans get from this Italian philosopher, kind of indirectly, the important ideas behind our Declaration of Independence. The last phrase of the Declaration of Independence is, we mutually pledge our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor to defend the principles we've just enumerated, articulated in this Declaration of Independence, right? So that balance comes from this Italian philosopher Aquinas as well.
Well, thank you,
Well,
Tova, for
great.
those great questions. Did you have one more, or?
Yes, apologies for internet issues, but I did catch a lot of your answers, so thank you for that. And then my last question is regards to your advocacy, with K-12 education and reforming that, we're at least improving the curriculum. So I was curious what you believe is taught in K-12 education and what the role of universities is in promoting
Okay,
that.
thank you. You broke up a little bit, but I think I get the question. So the initiative from the Arizona legislature and Governor Doug Ducey in 2016 was to say the public universities in the state are not doing enough to provide an education in fundamental civic principles and civic thought for American citizens, for aspiring American citizens. And so they gave what I call a civic funded mandate. There will be a new department with its own faculty, its own tenure lines, its own degrees and curriculum. And it's got this big long name, School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. And that is what has spread around the country. Governors and state legislatures in these different states, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, North Carolina, now Ohio, Utah, taxpayer dollars in a public university, or in Ohio, 5 public universities, there will be new departments or programs or centers to focus on civic education in a higher education way. So we call it at Arizona State in our school a blend of liberal arts education and civic education. So you do get to fundamental ideas, say in the American constitutional order, and then the philosophies behind them. And you emphasize disagreement, right? Because the American constitutional order comes out of 2,000 years of philosophical disagreement, starting with the ancient Greeks, right? And then the Constitution itself comes out of debate. Well, the Declaration also comes out of debate. So free people will disagree. So you learn that civic virtue, that's sort of a Socratic principle extended to civic life of debate and disagreement. So we do a liberal arts education and a civic education for American citizens and leaders. But then, as I mentioned, we think our PhD, philosophy faculty, political science PhDs, history PhDs, economics PhDs, we should be helping K-12 schools in our state, in other states as well, because every American citizen or aspiring citizen who goes through a public school deserves an excellent civic education to learn how it is to be a citizen as both a noun and a verb. to be a self-governing, informed, participating citizen. So there's civic knowledge there. And as I mentioned, there are civic virtues, like the civic virtue of learning to reasonably disagree, civil disagreement.
Well, that certainly sounds like an incredible initiative, and I know, all of us at Constituting America who care a lot about civics education wish you well, and so thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And that national study, Educating for American Democracy, it fits the principle of federalism. It's guidelines for states and localities to use. It is not a national curriculum on American civics and history. It's a broad guideline. We use the metaphor of a roadmap, right? You use the map to get to the destinations you want to by the route you want to get there in your different states or your different local education authorities, schools, classrooms. But those are the two big principles of it. And as Janine mentioned earlier, patriotism. We use the phrase reflective patriotism. It comes from Alexis de Tocqueville, that in the new world, the self-governing citizens don't have an old-fashioned kind of romantic blood and soil patriotism about the monarchy or 1,000 years ago. The Americans are based on ideas, and so a reflective, rational patriotism means they love America, they believe in America, they're grateful for America, but they want to argue. They want to argue with the government, they want to argue with each other, they want to figure out which principle is more important than the other principle. So Tocqueville says reflective patriotism. That's what you love America, but you want to argue with and about America. That's what we aim to do. That's what that Educating for American Democracy study aims to do.
Thanks for everything so far, Professor. One thing about this chat topic of constitutional restraints, I don't want to take it for granted as we go through the show. It is really an interesting concept itself, just having a constitutional restraint, meaning that if the people, like we talked about in the avoiding the tyranny of a majority, even if the majority of people want something, even if there's a pragmatic or practical reason why the government could or should achieve this thing, our founders thought and sought to create a government that in the long run would preclude the government from doing many of those things. And can you maybe just say, why? Because that is something that we should kind of face early on in our civics understanding, that we live in a place where we don't believe our government can do anything. And in fact, we have a constitution that says what it can do, not what it can't, because it can't do anything that it doesn't say that it can.
That's great. Another way of phrasing it is to say the government always has to prove its point. The government doesn't get freebies, right? It's not that government's bad. It's just that the government owes the citizens an explanation. And the distribution and separation of powers within each of the 50 states and within the federal government, and then federalism as the distribution across, means you're going to have more arguments. That's sort of the unwritten spirit behind our Constitution, that a government never gets a freebie. A government is always going to have to argue. You're always going to have to explain. You're always going to have to get multiple pieces of the government. You may get a piece of legislation passed, and guess what? You get sued. Someone brings a suit. It could be a state suing the federal government. It could be a private entity suing the federal government or state government, right? Because you've got these independent courts in the states and in the federal government. So it's a great principle that restraint doesn't mean immobilize, doesn't mean cancel. It just means the burden of proof is always on government, wherever it is, state government, local government, federal government. Prove it. Really, this is so important? You have to spend tax dollars. This is really so important. You have to restrain free citizens from doing something. Really, this is so important. We need to go to war. Really? Why? Tell me. And it's not going to be one argument. It's not going to be 10 arguments. They're going to have to do it 1,000 times.
And that concept of argument in and of
Yes.
itself is belief in reason, belief in the Socratic method. It's a statement of the way we think the world is ordered. That again is another assumption that we shouldn't take for granted in understanding our founding documents too.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Reason, it's not too much confidence in reason, right? You don't want just professors or just scientists or just experts governing, right? But it asks all citizens to, up your game, be informed, be interested, be engaged. Yes, there are some people who are more experts. I mean, people who get onto the federal bench, by and large, are a hell of a lot smarter about the law than I am, right? And most of us. So there's a role for that, and there's a role for the Senate. Hopefully they're supposed to be there for longer terms, and they're supposed to be a little insulated from, talk radio and cable TV and what's popular at the moment, right? But so the reason means all of us be reasonable, as well as you listen. Okay, I'm going to listen to this expert voice. Doesn't mean they're a priest or a priestess, and I have to believe and take a gospel truth what they say, but I'm going to listen and argue. And so, yes, that's a great point. Reason for all citizens to be engaged.
Last question. There's the country underwent massive change in our governmental structure, really following the Civil War, and that's something that really I didn't know as much about until we started doing constitutional chats and understanding 14th Amendment, some other amendments post the 14th Amendment. There's been in the way that those amendments have been understood, oftentimes there's been cases decided that maybe, or there's been a lot of debate about whether they should have been interpreted that way. Do you think that when we were talking about how the states are almost the fourth branch of government, do you think that the way our founders would have understand this government, our states have kind of laid down some of that responsibility, and some of our identity as being from our states has been lost based on unintended consequences of those amendments?
Yes, I would say, though, I agree with that, except I would say the more important problem, so to speak, from the vantage point of federalism, defending federalism, it comes in the 1930s and maybe a little bit before that. It's not so much the 14th and 15th, 13th and 14th and 15th, especially the 14th Amendment itself. It's the interpretation of those amendments, especially starting in the 20th century. Someone in the chat, I think, mentioned the 17th Amendment. The change in the election of senators is also a complicated story, but there's a decent argument that it's problematic story in the end. So now the argument that you have to make state by state, and in a larger American civic context, is what do we want the Senate to do now that we've changed the mode of election and made them run for popular elections, so they don't feel the same attachment to state government and representing states per se. They can get caught up in popular politics on a more national scale in each party. Well, how are we, when we elect our senators, who are we looking for, and what are we going to demand from our senators and from the Senate as an institution? So again, it's that active agent citizenship activity. But beyond the 14th Amendment and the 17th Amendment, it's really a change in a philosophy of government, and it's associated with the progressive movement, the Progressive Party, to say that a more rational government will be a less complicated government. A more rational and democratic government will be a more centralized government, centralized in Washington, and more use of elites, experts, the judiciary included. And there's been, 75 years of argument about that. And there are plenty of people around who are arguing against that and saying, well, there's some good ideas there, but mostly not good ideas, and pointing out the problems with it. And so it's still very much a live debate in American public life and American universities. And there are some, for the past 30 years, there have been some judges on the United States Supreme Court who are more sympathetic to your question than they are to the progressive movement and the centralizing of power. So federalism is alive and well in the United States Supreme Court. It's a rather amazing story.
Thank you very much. Great answers. And maybe we have a few audience questions we want to get to. It's been a jam-packed show, so thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Jewel and Jorn. Great questions. And thank you to Tova and Janine as well. Before we go to the audience questions, we want to give a few shout outs. We first want to say hello to our listeners on Las Vegas's KKVV. These chats air Monday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific on 1060 a.m. So thank you to KKVV for airing our podcasts. Now, we also want to give a shout out to some great Arizonans who are watching today, and especially Nancy Arnold and her husband, Ernie Arnold, who are longtime supporters of Constituting America, and they wanted to be sure and watch because of the Arizona connection. So I wanted to be sure and say hi to Nancy Arnold, who's watching with us today. Now, Amy Winchester writes in the chat, just to comment, I'm so excited to hear this about ASU and that this is spreading. I work with the University of Arizona and hope this can spread here. My son works for ASU and states this is a phenomenal department that Professor Carrese heads up. So I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you. Yeah, and I noticed in that I can see the chat as well. Amy had a comment later about the James Madison program at Princeton University, where I was very delighted to be a fellow almost 10 years ago now. Actually, it is 10 years ago now. Time flies. But Robbie George and his colleagues were an important inspiration behind the challenge of how we would build this department. There's very brief legislation that came from Arizona in 2016. And we looked to Robbie, I talked directly to Robbie and to Brad Wilson and others in the James Madison program network, so to speak, how we should develop a curriculum and this blend of liberal arts education and civic education. And truth be told, when I held up this pocket constitution earlier, I got the idea from Robbie. I mean, there are lots of pocket constitutions around, but Robbie had the Declaration of the Constitution and the Gettysburg Address. Robbie George in the James Madison program when I was there 10 years ago. And so I thought that's great, but we're going to bring it up to 1963, Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King is a patriot. He's a patriot about America, praising the Declaration of the Constitution, the magnificent words of those founding documents, the architects of our republic. And so that gets to that reflective patriotism. King, the Civil Rights Movement, they're arguing with America. We have got to do better. We're not living up to the principles of the Declaration, but we're not trashing America or the Declaration or the Constitution. We believe in it, and that's why we're going to argue about it, and we want it to be better.
Well, thank you. And we also want to give a shout out to Lisa Fiffield, who has students on from the American Heritage School. It looks like they may be in Utah. So Lisa, welcome to you and your students. We're so happy to have you here. And Professor Carrese, just in the last few minutes with our Q&A, let's see, Teresa Speak says, I just want to say I loved his statement that federalism is still alive and well at the Supreme Court, and especially as we look at the Keep 9. Yeah. And I think that's a movement that Teresa may be involved in to pass an amendment to limit the number of justices on the Supreme Court.
It's an interesting thing about the Supreme Court. It arguably is more powerful than the delegates at the Federal Convention in Philadelphia ever intended it would be. I wrote a book about this, so I have my opinions. On the other hand, it wasn't intended to be powerful. It's not an afterthought, right? It is third, Article 3, but they talked about judicial review, and the majority tyranny question that Tova asked earlier, right? They wanted a powerful presence of lawyers and judges, the common law principles of law. The Gilbert brothers talked about reason, right? They wanted, Hamilton writes about this in Federalist number 78 as Publius, right? They wanted this powerful presence of reason, not elected, not having to be at all involved with electoral politics or governments. They wanted that presence there. So it's a balance again, right? How powerful a Supreme Court and federal judiciary is too powerful and out of balance with the other branches of the federal government and with the states and with self-government generally. So you can hope for too much from the Supreme Court. It could be too powerful, but you have reasonable hopes to say it ought to be there. And those 9 justices, the number fluctuates because Congress controls the number of judges on the Supreme Court. Congress controls whether there's a lower federal judiciary at all. You can hope for them to do what they're supposed to do under the Constitution, and then you have to argue about it. What really are they supposed to do?
Well, thank you. And I know we're right at the top of the hour, but I did want to just throw, just quickly, Robert Zimmerman has got some great points about the Electoral College. And he says when he tries to talk to people about it, that so often people don't want to hear that we're really a republic. And do you have any ideas on ways to break the ice when talking to people about the importance of the Electoral College?
Well, one general point to make about America is that while we argue with each other and we focus on our arguments and we worry about, are enough people voting, and do enough young people have patriotic views? Do they understand our form of government? We have lots of worries. On the other hand, we are the most powerful, the most prosperous, the most successful Republican form of government ever to exist, and arguably the most powerful, prosperous, successful form of government, period, to ever exist in all of known recorded history. I know people will argue about that. That's what America is. We argue about it, but I think I got a pretty good case. Most powerful, most prosperous, most secure, more people around the world wanting to be governed under generally our form of government. So what is that, to go back to Janine's term, structures. One of the crucial structures is that Electoral College. You can't just take away pieces of that structure and say, oh, everything's going to be great if we just make this major change. Chuck out the Senate, chuck out the Electoral College, judges holding basically lifetime appointment, appointment office during good behavior. Just chuck it out. What could go wrong? The success of America, it's difficult to figure out what role each of these played, but the presidency being this balanced, empowered, but not too powerful and non-populist office is a crucial part of the success of America for 200 years. My own particular view is we have made it way too populist now with this primary method of elections, which gives way too much power to a few angry people in each state voting for candidates in each party. That's my own particular opinion about it. And it's lost the constitutional spirit of that office. So the spirit behind the Electoral College is wanting a powerful but reasonable and experienced set of candidates being selected and chosen to prevent demagogues and incompetent, inexperienced people from governing. And that is a crucial part of the secret sauce of America across.
Really great way to end the podcast. And I've never heard it explained quite that way before. Really love that. And just, if someone wants to receive a copy of your Constitution,
please, Constituting American can give you my contact information, but I'm on the web. You can find me through Arizona State University, and we do ship copies off to people, so we'd be glad to do that.
Well, thank you. So thank you so much, Professor Carrese. I'm so sorry we ran a little bit over. We had a bunch of great, enthusiastic audience questions today. And we want to ask our audience to join us next week, Tuesday at 2 p.m. We're going to be talking about national sovereignty. But Professor Carrese, thank you. Just such a wonderful guest. And we are just such admirers of the work that you do at Arizona State University and across the nation. So thank you for all you do for civics education.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for this wonderful organization and community that you've built in Constituting America. I'm delighted to be involved. Best wishes with all your work.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.